Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 3rd of November 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, the only weather report we've got in from our very own chat box is from the Rhondda, where apparently it's mild but overcast. It's a bit chilly and overcast here in Plymouth. We'll leave it at that, I think.
It's not so chilly in the world of Brexit. The psyop continues. Now, we've got to be really careful here, and I'm going to try to explain this best I can. But basically, the media, if you would believe them, which of course we don't, are using language like Parliament alone has the power to trigger Brexit, that the Lord Chief Justice, Lord Thomas, has made a judgment which is going to slow down the pace of departure from the EU, and it's a huge setback to Theresa May. Of course, because Theresa May was saying that she had the right to trigger Brexit on the basis of the royal prerogative. So before we come on to the details of that, let's just have a look at some of the responses. Tim Farron, of course, completely misunderstanding the situation, said ultimately the British people voted for a departure, but not for a destination. Well, that's completely untrue. It was sold to people as an in-out referendum. People understood absolutely what the destination would be, that we would be out. So Farron went on to say, which is why what really matters is allowing them to vote again on the final deal. Well, no, the vote was done. And in fact, for all the people in Parliament that are complaining that they're not getting a chance to vote on this, of course, they already did get a chance to vote on this because they voted on holding the referendum in the first place. So they agreed in the first place to accept the will of the people, which they ultimately aren't doing. So thus all these legal challenges. But nonetheless, this one is an important one. So here is Lord John Thomas. And the question is he a John Thomas? And, he has said the most fundamental rule of the UK Constitution is that Parliament is sovereign. Now, this is a really important point because he is speaking purely from a constitutional law point of view. And he's not saying that Parliament has sovereignty over the people. He's not saying that. He is mainly concentrating on a single point of law, and that is whether Theresa May has the right to use the royal prerogative to trigger Article 50 over the will of Parliament. Now, Parliament, of course, is supposed to obey the will of the people, but look, I've tried to sort of put this into a graphic here. So if you imagine that this is Parliament, we've got the House of Commons, we've got the House of Lords, that's what makes up Parliament, and in the centre we've got government, which is made up of some from the Commons and a few from the Lords. And in the centre there, we have the Crown in Parliament. Now, the key point is here that were revolutions fought in order to make sure that the Crown could not override the will of Parliament, that the Crown could not decide that its will would become domestic law. And that's what John Thomas is referring to here. So in this, to this extent, he has made the correct decision purely from a law standpoint. But the problem is that parliamentarians absolutely believe in the divine right of Parliament, and they're taking parliamentary sovereignty to be something beyond what it is, something unconstitutional. They're basically saying that it's Parliament's right to decide and to impose its will on the people. And this is where the problem lies. So I'm just going to point out that, of course, it's not the will of Parliament which is supreme here. It is the will of the people. And two examples of that are that we are absolutely governed by consent. That is absolutely fundamental. And the other point, of course, is jury, annulment by jury. The fact that the people, in the form of a jury, can decide that any legislation created by Parliament is unreasonable. And they can annul it. So the slogan is "Good juries nullify bad laws." Of course, we're not told this when we serve on juries, but that's not the point. So there is a deep constitutional issue here, and many people pointing out that what we're facing at this point is what they're calling a constitutional crisis. In a sense, that's right, but it doesn't lie with what the Lord Chief Justice decided here today. It lies with what Theresa May was attempting to do in the first place, which was to use the royal prerogative for something she had no right to do. That was dictatorship. But also the fact that Parliament is taking the divine right of Parliament, the sovereignty of Parliament, to a level that it's not supposed to be at. That's also a form of dictatorship. And at the end of the day, it's us as individuals that have to hold these people to account. Now, what they keep doing, and we saw this with the Iraq war in 2003, Brian, is they keep asking the same question over and over again until they get the right answer. So when 1 million people came out against the Iraq war in 2003, that was fine. When Tony Blair said, well, I'm not going to pay any attention to that, those 1 million people went back to sleep. We can't allow that to happen in this case. Sadly, UKIP isn't there to help do anything about it. The question is, who is? And I think we've got the answer to that.
Well, we have an
answer to that.
I think we have got an answer to that. I'll just say on the question of UKIP, actually, we've got over 4 million people who voted for UKIP. Those people are there, but what is the key issue for many of them? One is that they don't understand what is happening around them. The fact that we've got treason being carried out in our own parliament. We're starting to see it come to the surface with what's happened in this court ruling. But of course, we had Nigel Farage waving his hand saying, that is it, we've done our job, we've achieved Brexit. And that, of course, was totally untrue. So those supporters are still there. What they need to be doing is taking the right actions. And of course, this is music for the ears of the British Constitution Group, because the whole point of the conference on the 19th of November in Winchester was to put in front of the public the true Constitution, how it works, why we should respect it, why it can protect us, and to highlight the fact that at the moment we've got our very own Parliament running roughshod through it, as you've described, Mike. And the key point is to get all of the good people in this country at the moment to start working in a proper way to reassert the rule of law. And if we don't, we know what is coming, and that is it's a dictatorship very nearly here, but it's coming in by stealth, a step at a time. And that has been the agenda for a great many years. Well, what is the quality of our Parliament? Where do we go? Well, let's bring in the Justice Committee, since justice is the hot topic at the moment. And of course, this is on the back of Mr. Vaz, but I thought what we would do is just have a look and see what parliament.uk says about its own Justice Committee. So here's the page. Of course, it's all very colourful and reassuring. This is the halls of power. Trust us. But of course, who have we got in the halls of power? Well, we've got people like Keith Vaz. So let's remind ourselves of what he'd been up to. So he was filmed in a flat with 2 male prostitutes. There was discussion about who was going to get the drugs and who was going to pay for them. And this is the man that is then voted in by Parliament, including Amber Rudd, the present Home Secretary, that he was the quality of individual, or is the quality of individual, to sit on the Justice Committee. So most people would be outraged at this, but what we can do is explain why this has happened, really. So this is the Telegraph reporting. It said MPs were last night accused of bringing the House of Commons into disrepute after voting to allow Keith Vaz to oversee Britain's justice policies, even though he faces 2 police investigations. So we've got something interesting here. We've got the House of Commons and disrepute circulating around this man. But here we get into the meat of it, because the article continued that furious Conservative MPs had complained they'd been ordered to back Mr. Vaz because of concerns a vote against him could set a precedent in Parliament. Mike, I'll ask you live, what sort of precedents do you think this would be? It's it's a fascinating subject, because if they voted against him, would that mean that we've got a precedent that when MPs are simply not up to the job, they're breaching a basic moral code, they shouldn't be doing the job? If people would say Mr. Vaz is out, it would mean a large number of other MPs are out. So why would they vote to get him on the Justice Committee? Well, I mentioned this yesterday, but let's make sure it's up on screen so that people can see it. This is the BBC's own video clip of an interview with a Conservative whip from 1970 to 73 by the name of Tim Fortescue. And in the recording, which anybody can go online, go on YouTube, just Google Tim Fortescue, it will come up. In it, he says that MPs would come to the whips. It might be a scandal involving small boys, anything. They, the members, would come and ask if we might help. And he then went on to say, this might sound a little bit unpleasant, but we did help, because they would then do as we asked. So what this Conservative whip was saying live on camera to the BBC is that within the British Parliament, it was quite okay to use the subject of child abuse. These weren't just little boys, these were little boys clearly being abused, that the Tory whip was revealing that that child abuse could be used to blackmail MPs. So I think we have to ask the question, is the whole Mr. Vaz affair, is this about disrepute in Parliament, or is this about people with immense power because they know the dirty little secrets being unleashed? And we can't touch that. Mm. So let's contrast that with the treatment of this lady. Melanie Shaw, the whistleblower for child abuse in Beechwood Home in Nottingham, she is still in prison. She is weeks into prison. She badly needs our help and support because essentially she's now a political prisoner still in prison to make sure her evidence can't actually damage MPs who are being named by various witnesses in relation to child abuse, but the government doesn't want to talk about this. Now, we've got Keith Vaz selected for the Justice Committee. This would be a committee that should be working to make a judgment on what is happening to Melanie Shaw. I'm going to say I received a letter from Melanie. This is one of two letters I've personally received from her over about 24 weeks. And Melanie has been saying that her mail has been interfered with and withheld. I'll read this. This is part of a letter. I feel I cannot take my foot off the pedal, so to say, on such a sensitive issue, as lives are at stake here, innocent children's lives, despite my own circumstances, which are abysmal, as I'm held in segregation still. Justice, care and the prevention of child abuse remain my main concern. Love and blessings to you and your small army of helpers. Thank everyone for their love and support, please, as it gets me through my ordeal. So here is this immensely brave woman who spoke out about the abuse of children in Beechwood Children's Home, Nottingham. She discovers that Nottinghamshire Constabulary were lying in their conduct of Operation Daybreak. They said they were investigating her evidence. It was proven that that was absolutely not the case. And when Melanie flagged this up, very quickly she's being harassed by Nottinghamshire police. She's eventually put in prison on an arson charge. She's released, she's bullied, she's harassed, she's lost her son, she's lost her house. And now the British state, under the hand of Theresa May, Home Secretary, puts her back in prison where we do not even know whether she's been charged or sentenced or is on remand. And that is the case for Melanie herself. No idea why she is in prison, but she is still kept in solitary confinement. And of course, according to the UN and our very own Guardian, solitary confinement is torture. So I thought we'd remind ourselves that the two key women here are Theresa May, Prime Minister now, but of course former Home Secretary when this terrible case against Melanie Shaw was being concocted by the British government. But it's now being continued by Amber Rudd. And if you'd like to know more about solitary confinement, The Guardian here has got a particularly good article on it, where it says solitary confinement isn't punishment, it is torture. So, Mike, we've got a good picture of Parliament, according to the judges.
No, that's government.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Okay, we've got a picture of government here. It is untrustworthy, deceitful. It comprises people. Most people would say these people shouldn't be there. But when it comes to child abuse and whistleblowers, then what can they do? Put them in prison. Well, many people are probably going to say, what do you do about this? Because, of course, their own MPs are running away from the subject. We've had Tim Farron on very early on, leader of the Lib Dems, not interested in child abuse. Well, maybe he is, because he's the man encouraging more vulnerable children to come in from Syria. But when 300 of them go missing, he's not interested. But what can we do? Well, have a look at this man. You can go onto the parliamentary site to have a look. But we've got Bob Neal, chair of the Justice Select Committee. So he's going to be boss for Keith Vaz, presumably, Mike. And he says that select committees are one of the ways that we as MPs hold government to account. Don't believe a word of that, but I think we can do something through this team. We look into the workings of the Ministry of Justice and the various agencies that are accountable to that, the Attorney General, who's the government's chief legal advisor and also oversees the work of the Crown Prosecution Service. We are taking evidence from people who want to give us their experience, their view. We can suggest topics. You can suggest topics where the system hasn't worked. We'll send out a call for evidence. The public can contribute. And ultimately, there's a report and it can be debated on the floor of the House. So I felt this morning that perhaps our viewers might like to take on Mr. Bob Neal MP. We might like to present the case of Melanie Shaw, or indeed any other child abuse cases, to this man. And let's put the Defence Committee, now including Keith Vaz, on the spot, because I think in Keith Vaz's previous professional career, he was the legal officer for one of the London inner city boroughs where child abuse was taking place. So he would surely have a deep interest in exposing what was actually happening then and there.
I think if all the coverage that we've done on Melanie Shaw and her plight, I have to say I think that letter demonstrates absolutely just how dignified and impressive a woman she is.
It's quite incredible, isn't it? She says her circumstances are abysmal. In fact, I don't feel that I can tell viewers exactly what's happened to this lady in prison, but it's quite clear that inside the prison where she's being held, I think almost there's a total breakdown of discipline, and certainly we're seeing some brutal treatment of Melanie Shaw, and I'm sure that's similar for other prisoners. Welcome to Britain 2016 under Conservative Theresa May.
Well, I'm going to thank Paul for tipping me off to this, but this Mail article, a couple of days old now, I think this came out on the 31st of October. Iraqi special forces poised on eastern edge of Mosul. And of course, we're covering certain subjects, but this, I think, is typical of the Mail. They've taken an Associated Press article, they've published it, they haven't done any due diligence on it, and we're going to demonstrate what that means. So, Iraqi special forces poised on eastern edge of Mosul. And as we scroll down through the image, article, we see this image of two boys standing beside a wall. The wall's got some writing on it, and the caption says, "People inspect the aftermath of a deadly car bomb explosion that hit a popular fruit and vegetable market in a commercial street in Baghdad's northwestern neighborhood of Haraya, Iraq, on Monday, the 31st of October. Iraqi police say a parked car bomb exploded in Baghdad's northwestern neighborhood, killing at least 10 people and wounding many." So the Mail has published this, killing 10 people and wounding many. So let's just pay attention to some of the features of this. We've got a light brown gate here. We've got a darker concrete wall with some writing on it. And further on down the article, we've got another image of some different people standing beside where this car bomb went off. People inspect the aftermath of a deadly car bomb explosion that hit a popular fruit and vegetable market, and so it goes on. And again, we see the same gateway, light brown gateway, and the greyish concrete wall with the writing on it. So Paul pointed out this video to me yesterday, and again we can see the gateway on the left-hand side there, with the wall with the writing on it, and the car parked. So let's just have a quick look at this video. And as you can see, there's somebody standing beside the car at the moment. He's got his head in the car. We're not quite sure what he's doing. He walks briskly away to a parked van. And he's getting into the parked van. The parked van drives away, and we sit and we wait. This takes a few seconds for the next event to take place. But as you can see there is there's no packed fruit and vegetable market there. The car explodes. Well, what happens next? Let's see.
It's quite remarkable what happens next.
So we've got a bunch of people running in here, and they all start lying down. Oh my goodness. So there they are lying down. And then the actor comes in. Oh my goodness, his arms up in the air, he's shouting, he's screaming, and oh goodness me, here comes an ambulance. Somebody gets out of the ambulance, and they start picking up the people that have just lain down on the ground, picking them up off the street and putting them in the ambulance. And as you can see in the top right-hand corner there, this says 30th of the 10th, 2016. So the Mail article said that these events took place on the 31st of the 10th, but in fact they took place on the 30th. And we see the crisis actors working hard to build, and here come the first responders, crisis actors working hard to build a scene, which unfortunately has been leaked. So, Brian, what do we say about the Daily Mail and Associated Press and everybody else is pushing out this rubbish propaganda?
Well, the answer is, Mike, that none of the mainstream press is doing any proper investigative journalism, and their own journalists are prepared to tell us in person that, of course, this is largely to do with the fact there's no money for them to go out and do any proper investigative journalism. So even though you're buying a large name paper, they're doing their research badly off the internet. This is then circulated, it's picked up by other papers, and the lie grows. And of course, our own security services, and we're going to come on to them in a minute, are incapable of telling us the true picture of what's going on. But these are street actors. This is a created story in order to fit the agenda of the UK at the moment, which is to destroy nation states at any cost.
Yeah. Yes. Well, before we move on, I just want to mention Vanessa Beeley, of course, will be at the British Constitution Group conference on the 19th. But she will also be in Bristol tomorrow night. Syria, civil war or NATO war of aggression for regime change. Vanessa Beeley and Reverend Andrew Ashdown will be speaking at ARC Events, 27 Broad Street, Bristol. It starts at 7 p.m. Hope to see very many people there.
Okay, well, of course, it's money that makes the world go round and corruption associated with it. And once again, we're going to advertise the Great British Mortgage swindle film, which will be showing at the Savoy Cinema, Derby Road, Nottingham, 5 p.m. on the 5th of November. If you haven't come across all of the information that's now coming out about mortgages and why it is complete and utter fraud, then if you're local, obviously pop along and see that film, but I'm sure it'll be circulated on the internet fairly shortly afterwards. Well, the BBC, of course, the BBC says that it's full of democratic reporting. One thing is you're going to have a big smile on your face if you're wondering how to spend your salary of £450,000 a year. That's what Tony Hall gets for running a £3.65 billion propaganda machine that doesn't seem to be able to report accurate information. So I took a little look on the BBC website this morning, and I was just interested in how Russia was portrayed. So let's just have a look at this little recorded clip. A little bit jerky, but it should scroll through. So lots of dynamic articles, of course, lots about the TV, reporters, features, most of which is complete junk. Here we've got the explainers and why Windows hack is blamed on the Russians. So notice what it says, blamed on the Russians. But when you click the link, it suddenly changed to the why the Windows hack is being blamed on the Russia-linked group. It's all getting a little bit wobbly at this stage. But we've got lots of James Bond type pictures. We've then got Microsoft Windows chief accusing a notorious group of hackers previously linked to Russia. This is Strontium, so previously linked. And then here we've got that other cybersecurity researchers say analysis of the hackers suggests they're Russians. But First Eye has gone as far to say that the attackers are most likely sponsored by the Russian government.
But so they may not even be Russian.
Yeah, the link has never been conclusively proven, and the Kremlin has repeatedly denied its involvement. So the BBC, the subliminal message is that it's the Russians, but when you actually get into it, it's a complete created article based on nothing. But it ends with a nice picture of that nasty man, Mr. Putin, just to make sure you've got the message. It was the Russians, according to the BBC. But we've got Alan Woodward, who used to work for GCHQ. He says there's no smoking gun. He's advised Europol, he's worked with GCHQ, but he says the amount of circumstantial evidence is clearly mounting. What most of the government agencies are saying is that the Russian government doesn't seem to be doing anything to stop them, which kind of tells a story in itself. So where is the evidence, Mr. Alan Woodward? And if the Russians don't want to stop them, presumably GCHQ with £1.9 billion allocated should be doing the job.
Well,
we'll come on to that a little bit more, Mike.
That's a bit pathetic, all of that. Well, sticking with Russia then, here's General Valery Gerasimov, and Russia actually announced a pause in the bombing of Aleppo. We mentioned that, I think, yesterday or the day before. And they're calling on everybody that's involved in the fighting in eastern Aleppo, whether they be described as moderate rebels or ISIS or al-Nusra, whoever they are, because it's impossible to tell who is who. They're just basically telling everybody to get out. Gerasimov, who's chief of the Russian General Staff, said that the militants, our friendly terrorists, failed to break through a blockade around the city last week. So they're going to open 2 channels for them to get out through. They're going to withdraw the Russian and the Syrian forces. And he said, considering that our American colleagues were unable to separate the opposition from terrorists, we're addressing all militant leaders directly, urging them to cease hostilities and leave Aleppo with their arms. 2 corridors will be opened from which Syrian troops and weapons will be pulled back. And that's 2 separate corridors on top of the 6 that are open for civilians wanting to leave as well. And in the meantime, of course, all the stuff in the South China Sea rumbles on. But this is quite an interesting development because Russia, after the Second World War, Russia and Japan never signed the peace agreement. And there were 2 main reasons for that. First of all, because the Russians objected to the fact that China had not been invited to the peace discussions after the Second World War, but also because Japan and Russia were in difficulties over the Kuril Islands, which the Japanese called their northern territories. So they're disputed islands off the north of Japan. Russia absolutely determined that they're theirs. But they're now they have now started drafting up a peace treaty after 70 years. Well, we'll see how that goes, but they're making serious moves in that direction. Of course, that has the possibility of somewhat changing the geopolitical scenario in the east of China, South China Sea, and so on.
I would think, Mike, that Japan is getting a little bit unnerved by the sheer power of China as it emerges, and that probably cozying up to the Russians a bit, they would think that would take some of the pressure off. We also can say to people, don't forget that it was the Russians that drove the Japanese out of Manchuria at the end of the Second World War, a whole operation where the Russians, of course, withdrew troops from Europe at a time when they were being accused of about to overrun the West. And the Russians then took on the responsibility of clearing Imperial Japanese forces out of Manchuria. There's some really excellent documentaries on this on YouTube, and it's an area of history which many people in the West, many of us in the West, were never, ever taught about. So I think there's some interesting politics going on there. Well, let's come back to Mr. Hammond and the fact that out of nowhere, there's another 1.9 billion for fighting cyber attacks. This is part of the Guardian article. So they spoke to Tim Berners-Lee, the founder of the World Wide Web. He said, clearly, we've seen the internet can be attacked, and the United Kingdom needs to have a strong but responsible and accountable police force, and GCHQ has to have the tools to defend us and defend the open internet. I don't think we want to make a first strike, but when you're being attacked by a whole lot of domestic appliances, then the way you defend yourself is striking back by taking over those machines yourself. Are we domestic appliances? I did wonder whether anybody who dares criticise the government is now being called a domestic appliance. And according to Tim Berners-Lee, we need to use the police working with GCHQ to take us over. The dictatorship is here, really, Mike. We know what's happening in Parliament. So how is, where are we? How is GCHQ spending its 1.9 billion? Let's have a little look at this page. Here's their website. And I did notice spooky connections. So I thought, well, this is obviously worthwhile. This is about national security. But no, it's about the fact that one of their employees, Sir John Thomas Pratt, a pretty appropriate name, I would say, but he did extremely well in counterintelligence and GCHQ, and he would have been well known, but his brother, William Henry Pratt, became Boris Karloff, famed for playing Frankenstein's monster. So a civil servant was paid an hourly rate, I would imagine a pretty good hourly rate, to drag up that information and to post it on GCHQ's website as part of their 1.9 billion spend on counter-terrorism. Actually, I think something a little more subtle was going on, and that is that I think that Britain's security services are starting to realise for the first time the public are watching them and asking what they are actually doing for their money. And spooky messages on GCHQ's website is part of an agenda to soften them. They're really nice people with their little cuddly teddy bears by their computer screens, and we should trust them. Well, the opposite, I think, is true.
Yeah. Well, Colombia is the next country to be receiving some good British soft power, and Theresa May has, according to this article, vowed to strengthen trade ties with Colombia. She has pledged to help Colombia achieve peace and prosperity, because Santos was visiting the UK yesterday. He's in Northern Ireland today, apparently. Here they are, the pair of them, clearly enjoying each other's company. Theresa May said, "A peaceful, prosperous Colombia is in both our interests, and I look forward to working with President Santos to forge an even stronger partnership in the years ahead." So the UK is going to contribute to prosperity programs in Colombia, apparently, by up to £25 million. I'm not sure whether that means that they're buying £25 million worth of cocaine for the House of Commons. That's quite possible. They're going to support economic development, and they're going to open up investment and export opportunities worth £6 billion to the UK economy. Good stuff. In addition, a further £7.5 million from the government's Conflict, Security and Stability Fund is going to be allocated to support the Colombian peace process, with £2.5 million dedicated specifically to support demining through the United Nations Trust Fund. And they have agreed a £20 million bioeconomy research program. And I was wondering initially whether that was about productivity in the with regard to cocaine, but no, it's apparently biofuels. Well, let's have a look and see what Jane Ellison had to say. She said, today's agreement between the UK and Colombia emphasises our shared commitment to increasing trade and investment between our countries. She's, of course, in case anybody isn't sure, Financial Secretary to the Treasury. Well, she has also announced a double taxation agreement with Colombia, which means, of course, if you're trading in cocaine or other products with Colombia, you won't get taxed in both countries. So that's good news. And what did Boris Johnson have to say? He said, we're delighted to welcome President Santos to the UK. Britain works hand in hand with Colombia on the world stage whenever the occasion demands.
Good.
Yes. And he said, we have an important national interest in the security and prosperity of Colombia, cocaine, and we look forward to forging new links in science, education and research while reinforcing the traditional friendship between our two people through increased tourism. Colombia is on the verge of a historic peace agreement, and through our ongoing support for the country, the UK is well placed to take advantage of the opportunities that will follow. So this is more soft power, and Colombia, the unlucky recipients of it.
Yeah, so overseas politicians, leaders, they're usually called now, aren't they, glad handing it with British representatives of the Conservative Party. Meanwhile, we've got political prisoners being tortured in Britain's prisons. It's sort of the world on its head from probably what we were taught at school. Well, on the subject of education, we were given some information yesterday that really gave us quite a jolt because it appears in the Plymouth region we are now going to have emotional and mental health driven straight into every school. We're just going to give you a taster of this. We've a little bit more work to do on it, but I think you'll be absolutely shocked at what I'm going to show you. This is part of a presentation. This is not UK column slides. This is from Plymouth City Council itself. There it is, emotional health and wellbeing services in schools. And it says it's on behalf of Plymouth Schools, part of the project, Plymouth City Council, New Devon CCG, Clinical Commissioning Group, The Zone, Zen Zone, Young Devon, Live Well Southwest. So it all looks encouraging. What are they going to do? Well, they're commissioning schools who are going to get involved. They're going to pool their budgets. Young people have been telling us that mental health is a priority issue for them. That's a very interesting statement, Mike, which I'd question straight away. Children and young people commissioning strategy, co-commissioning with schools, future in mind, schools as key partners. And then down at the bottom, we've got something very interesting. This is the Tavistock Clinic up in London, the Tavistock model for CAMHS, mental health, called Thrive, moving away from tiers, staff with most experience to be available in community settings. Some quite remarkable language here, but it's linking back to the Tavistock Institute in London. But don't worry, we're going to be linking schools together and looking after the emotional health of our children. Somebody suggested, and I think it's probably pretty correct, this looks like a move towards named person scheme for England. Let's have a look in a bit more depth. Well, this is another one of the slides. I found this very sinister. Access to CAMHS assessment, waiting times for support. Certainly if somebody's got some mental health issues, these are not images which are lifting you up. These are images which are going to take you into a very dark place. But wait for this, because a mere £1.25 billion has been allocated over 5 years to roll out this programme. Future in mind, 2015, and then the priorities for mental health, early intervention, crisis, eating disorders, and a co-commissioned whole school approach for secondary and special schools. But essentially, we're going to have representatives in every single school. 1.25 billion, 1.9 billion for GCHQ, 1.25 billion. Money isn't really a problem, Mike.
Well, let me understand this. They have allocated £1.9 billion to GCHQ to protect the entire nation from Russian cyber attacks. Right?
Yes.
And they have allocated 1.25 billion, which is 2/3 of the same amount of money, just for dealing with mental health issues in the Plymouth area.
It is an extraordinary sum. That is the figure that is on this document, which has come from Plymouth City Council. Could it be an error? Possibly. But at the moment, that's the figure that's being stated over 5 years. And what we need to find out is if this is just happening in the Plymouth area as some sort of model, template model to be rolled out across the country, or even bigger sums of money are now going to target children in schools right the way across UK. So let's have a look at this one. This is another part of the information that came through to us. So we've got emotional health and wellbeing support services in schools. A lady called Shelley Shaw is apparently the commissioning officer. That always implies money to me. It's like a commercial contract. Maybe I'm wrong. So a lot of background to this, some of which I don't know at the moment. If anybody out there is reading this and knows where this comes from, I'd like to know. But the 2014 Our Turn report, the Fairness Commission report, Future in Mind, counselling in schools.
Well, actually, in terms of the Fairness Commission report, we have a major article coming pretty soon on that. Martin Edwards is doing that work. So that we will be covering that particular aspect of this in the not too distant future.
Right, excellent. But we could ask a question, have we got any normal children at all? According to these people, schools are just full of youngsters who've got mental health problems, or maybe if they haven't got them now, they're going to have them fairly soon. And look at where the information comes from. Youth Parliament has identified mental health of their 2016 campaign. This is all part of big society where youngsters who can't even plan their own lives, that's no criticism, they're youngsters, they're still learning what life is about, being brought into parliaments where they're learning how they're going to be future leaders. And these youngsters are apparently now saying that mental health is a top priority. Is this real, or is this government propaganda being injected into young people's minds, Mike?
Well, it looks, this is just my opinion, I'm interested in your view, it looks to me like they're attempting to create a new industry here. If we look at the cancer industry, cancer at the moment being advertised on television as if it's washing up liquid. Same with Alzheimer's. These are being advertised to generate income for vested interests. This looks like another attempt to create an industry.
A whole industry. But what most sinister for me is that it talks about creating a network of all these agencies. So they're all swapping data, they're all talking. There's a little social group called the Octopus or something like it. It's invariably rather dark and rather sinister language, which is being used within what we are told is the CARE organisation. So we just bring up next steps. Here we are. We've got governance through PLT inclusion, interested providers to register for tenders. I think that's what you're talking about, Mike. There's the money aspect. Future co-commissioning. There's the money, finance strategy. Schools need to link with a mental health network to understand the system. So no child is going to be safe from these people. If you're a parent, what this is doing is going to put effectively named person individuals next to every child. And if you think you've seen it all, you haven't, because we've got 4454. I have no idea what that means at the moment, but we've got Thrive, a radical upgrade in prevention. Don't get a good feel off Thrive. This is what they say is the rationale. Public health is the science and art of preventing disease, prolonging life, promoting health through organised efforts of society, organisations, public and private, communities and individuals.
It's interesting that they use American spelling in those words, and I just wonder, is this coming from the United States, this entire programme?
It's coming from all over the place, Mike, but we're going to bring up a lot more of this material for people to see, and a large part of it is page after page of statistical analysis on individuals, where you live, what your lifestyle is, what your health's like, how much you drink, how much you smoke. I read through as quickly as I could. I haven't had long to look at this material, but it seems to me that we, the public, are just rats in the laboratory, and the superior trained leaders are now going to tell us how we need to run our lives in order to live in their world. And children, of course, they're brought up in that environment. They're going to be reframed for whatever these people have got in store. Deeply sinister stuff. If anybody's in the Plymouth area and can give us more information, we would love to know. Well, let's end on a positive note, and a big thank you. As I said a few days ago, letters arrive on our doormat. We opened this one. It was a donation for £5, a very nice little handwritten note saying, please take this small donation of £5. Sorry, it's not more. And that's come from DC in South Wales. Well, we would say thank you very much. Let's put that up on the screen because all of these little donations help. We very much appreciate them. And we know for some people on very low incomes that these sums of money represent a lot. So thank you very much for sending that to us. And thank you to all our other supporters who are continuing to donate or subscribe, because without you, we couldn't do what we do. Well, remarkable news, Mike. We've got a sovereign parliament. Parliament is going to tell us we need to vote again on Europe because the majority who voted for out apparently have got it wrong, but we're going to be told how to get it right. And the quality of people who are going to tell us how to get it right include Mr. Keith Vaz, who has had a little bit of an incident with some young men and mention of drugs, but not to worry because he's on the Justice Committee. And we'll leave you with a thought for Melanie Shaw, who represents, of course, the child abuse survivors, one of the child abuse survivors in the UK. And where does Conservative representative Theresa May put her? In prison. Welcome to Britain. Thanks for joining us. We will be back at 1 o'clock tomorrow with David Scott with Northern Exposure. Bye-bye.